We want to go straight to one of the top experts about Lake Michigan water levels. Joining us now from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is Deanna Apps. She is a physical scientist and is involved in making the water levels forecast for Lake Michigan. So, Deanna, right out of the gate, it's clear if you look at some of the data for the Great Lakes, including Lake Michigan, we have high water level years and low water level years, and it almost seems to go on a cycle sometimes. So is that normal, and how rare are the water levels we're seeing now?
So the high water levels that we're seeing now are, are definitely, fairly unprecedented. I mean, we have our period of water levels that goes back to 1918. And, a lot of people remember just, the high water of the mid to late 1980s. That's what a lot of the records we're breaking right now are from 1986. But then, we in the late 90s, we entered a period of low water on Lake Michigan, Huron, and that lasted till about 2013. Actually, in January of 2013 Lake Michigan, Huron set a record low in that month. And, 7 years later, we're at record highs. So we had a fairly quick transition there from low to high water between 2013 and 2020.
Yeah, talking about that swing from 2013 to 2020, do you know, is that the fastest increase that we've seen on record for water levels?
I'm not sure if it's the quote unquote the fastest, but it definitely was a very, very quick turn for the Great Lakes basin. I mean, the Great Lakes system is large, and it takes time to really get water levels to move, it either transition to higher or even to lower. From where we are now, we know that we need a persistent dry conditions over several months or years to get water levels back to near average at this point.
Yeah, so what did get us into this boat, so to speak? Was it purely just precipitation, or are there a lot of factors?
Yeah, so it's really a combination of things. There's three main variables that we track at the Corps of Engineers. Obviously, water levels are impacted by a lot of different meteorological variables, but the three main ones: precipitation, evaporation, and runoff. Those are the three main things we're tracking throughout the year that impact water levels and their annual cycles that we see, where water levels are typically rising in the springtime when you get that increased precipitation. And then, reaching their peaks in the summer and declining primarily in the fall due to evaporation being significant during that time. And what really brought us, from that low water to high water period was predominantly impacted by precipitation over the last 6 to 7 years we've seen in the region, and especially the last three. Really 2017, 18, and 19 were exceptionally wet in the Great Lakes Basin. And I think there's been a few places around Michigan, and even in other parts of the basin, they had their record wettest year in 2019, which was followed, or which was previously set in 2018 even. So we've just seen very wet conditions over the recent years, which has led to that transition from low to high.
So this is something that I've always wondered. How do you guys actually measure the water levels? Because sometimes we'll check in at some of the gauge sites and they look like they're higher than the record for the month, the all-time record for the month. But you guys say not so fast. There's a lot that goes into it. So walk us through that process.
Yeah, so on our website, you can get what we call daily lake-wide average water levels for each of the Great Lakes. So Lake Superior, we consider Lake Michigan, Huron one lake from a hydrologic perspective because they're connected at the Straits of Mackinac, so they rise and fall together. And then we have Lake St. Clair, and then Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And we do, when we calculate those water levels, we do that with a network of water level gauges. So each of them have, Lake St. Clair is smaller, that's only 2 gauges, but the rest of them have about 4 or 5 gauges that are around the lakes. And we do that, we take a lake-wide average because we understand that at certain points, depending on which way the wind's blowing or a storm system that's moving through the region, you're going to see a lot of local variability at those respective gauges. And we're trying to make a representation of still water, essentially. That's why we do a lake-wide average calculation, because we want to know really maybe what's that average water level across the whole lake surface. So, if you're curious on a specific location, a lot of those, gauges on the U.S. side are run by NOAA, and you can access, more local variability in water level on their websites and things like that, because we understand that there is, you're going to see that difference locally that you may not see in a daily lake-wide average water level.
And you just mentioned all of the Great Lakes, which I love because it leads into our next question really well. I was just checking out some of the data on some of the Great Lakes, and I was surprised to see that some of them are fairly different. For example, Lakes Michigan and Huron are up 3 inches from June, but Superior is down 5 inches. And then this is the one that I really don't get. Ontario is down 2 feet from that date. So why are there differences? Do you have any insight on that you can shed some light on for us?
So there's a couple things in play there. One is, basin conditions. Yes, the Great Lakes system is large, and typically we're affected by a lot of the same, weather patterns and things like that. But sometimes you can see differences, especially, just from, Lake Michigan and Lake Superior versus Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario and Erie have really seen some more predominantly drier conditions over the last few months than what we've seen in the Lake Michigan, Huron, Superior Basin. It seems like even last month in June, there was a couple, storm events that seemed to impact those regions more than what was occurring in the eastern parts of the Great Lakes Basin. So that's a factor. Another factor for Lake Ontario is, their outflow is regulated out of the St. Lawrence River. And there also is outflow regulation between Lake Superior and Lake Michigan Huron through the St. Mary's River. But especially for Lake Ontario, with the high water levels that we're seeing last year, that outflow is regulated through the International Joint Commission, through those respective boards of controls. And they've really made it a point to maximize outflows really since the high water, the records from last year. And that has also had a contribution to the Lake Ontario levels being a little bit lower than some of the other lakes.
Really interesting. So focusing back in on Lake Michigan, if precipitation plays such a big factor even over just a few months, right now we're not projected to break the all-time record high set back in 1986 for high water level on Lake Michigan Huron, but could like 1 or 2 events just push us over the edge? Could we actually still grab that title this year?
That's a great question. And, our 6-month forecast that, we put out, we do that at the beginning of every month. Currently, that forecast is indicating that, we're going to see record highs probably for July and August. And then it's likely that water levels will start to fall below records as we, continue more into that seasonal decline period come fall and early winter. However, I do want to caution too that, right now we are above, levels of 1986. And, really what happened in the fall of 1986 was, we saw really 2 very wet months of September and October. And that's what led to that October 1986 record high water level for all months in the period of record. So I don't want to say, based off our current forecast, we don't think that that's necessarily likely, but it's definitely not out of the realm of possibilities. If we get a really wet fall, maybe unprecedented precipitation or something that can occur like that, it's not out of the question for sure. I mean, right now the peak is, right now at the last, the June monthly mean was only about 2 inches below that. So yes, I always like to caution, we may not be setting records, maybe in the fall, but water levels are still going to be high and we're still going to see impacts.
Yeah, very last question, kind of piggybacking off of that. Does this mean that we're not out of the woods for the year 2021?
Yeah, that's so right now our 6-month forecast goes through December, and a lot a lot of the 2021 and what that looks like is really going to depend on how these next few months play out. It's very hard to predict precipitation and evaporation runoff and all those things that like air temperatures and what that's all going to look like come the fall and early winter. And with being that water levels are primarily driven by Mother Nature, it makes looking out in the longer term very, very difficult. So 2021, we're not sure yet of what that will look like, but hopefully it's lower than this past year.
Yeah, as a meteorologist, I can definitely relate. A lot of things are changed in the moment. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate the insight that you've given us. This has been Deanna Apps, physical scientist with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Thank you, Deanna.
Thank you.